Ayn Rand is one of the most influential women, or people, period, in United States history. The economic conditions that we're working under today are the direct result of her objectivist ideology, which states that selfishness is indeed a virtue. Much of her ideology can be understood as a reaction to the oppression that she and her family fled under the communist dictatorship in the Soviet Union. But what many people don't know is that she was also inspired by a man that she called the best and strongest expression of real man psychology I have ever heard. That man was William Hickman, and he was on trial for brutally murdering and dismembering a 12-year-old girl. Let's get into it. Let's go all the way back to 1927. December 15th, 1927, to be specific, at Mount Vernon Junior High School in Los Angeles, California. On that morning, a well-dressed young man walked into the registrar's office and asked to pick up the daughter of the wealthy banker, Perry Parker. He told the secretary that Parker had been injured in an accident and he wanted to see his daughter. Now, the secretary was a little confused because Perry Parker had two daughters. So the man said, he asked for the youngest one, which was also kind of confusing because the secretary knew that Parker had twin daughters, Marion and Marjorie, and so they were, of course, the same age, 12 years old. So again, the young man corrected himself and said, the littler one. So apparently he sensed there was some questioning of his story, so the man produced a piece of paper with a phone number on it and urged her to call the bank that Perry owned, and they would confirm that he in fact worked there, as though that also would confirm the fact that he had Parker's permission to pick up his daughter. But anyway, that was apparently enough for the secretary. She didn't bother to call or confirm anything, and she pulled little Marion out of class and allowed her to go her way with this well-dressed young man who didn't even leave his name. But Perry Parker had not been in an accident. When Marion didn't return home from school that afternoon, the Parkers launched a search but didn't find anything. So the next day they went to the police to report her missing. Very soon after they made the report, they received a telegram that was addressed from Pasadena. It was a ransom note. In it, the kidnapper wrote, "Do positively nothing till you receive special delivery letter." He demanded $1,500, which would be more than $22,000 in today's money. Through further telegrams, an exchange was set up for Parker to deliver the money and receive Marion. But apparently the kidnapper caught sight of police around the drop-off site, so the exchange didn't happen. Throughout the next day, December 17th, there were several more ransom notes that arrived by telegram. They were signed sometimes Death, sometimes Fate, sometimes the Fox. In one of them, the kidnapper wrote, "Get this straight. Your daughter's life hangs by a thread, and I have a Gillette ready and able to handle the situation." Another was a handwritten letter from Marion asking her father to pay the ransom and let her come home. The kidnapper instructed Parker to get the $1,500 in $20 gold certificates and meet him at the corner of West 5th Street and South Manhattan Place at 7 p.m. So Parker went there. While he was there, he saw a man in a Chrysler coupe pull up next to him. He said the man's face was mostly hidden by a bandana. He pointed a sawed-off shotgun at Parker and said, "You know what I'm here for, no monkey business." When Parker asked to see his little girl, the man pointed beside him in the car, and inside, bundled up with blankets up to her neck, was little Marion. Parker said that the man told him that Marion was sleeping, but he could see that her eyes were open. So he called out to her, and she didn't respond, so he assumed she had been drugged. So Parker handed over the gold certificates. The man immediately sped forward about 200 yards, said, "Here's your daughter," and kicked her out of the car, then sped away. Parker believed the nightmare was finally over. He rushed over to his daughter, but what he found there was worse than what he had feared. It was immediately clear that Marion was dead. Her eyes were held open with wire. Once he opened up the bundle of blankets that she was in, he found that it only contained her head and torso. She had been decapitated, dismembered, and disemboweled. Clothing and towels had been stuffed into her body cavity. The next day, her limbs and organs would be found wrapped in newspaper and scattered around Elysian Park. An autopsy revealed that Marion had been dead for about 12 hours. It also revealed a crucial piece of evidence. One of the towels found inside her body had the logo of the Bellevue Arms Apartments. So police went there and questioned several of the tenants, including one man named Donald Evans. He allowed them to search his apartment, but they didn't find anything suspicious, and so they couldn't arrest him or do anything else. After that, Evans left and never came back. Meanwhile, the police launched a massive manhunt with over 20,000 police officers and American Legion volunteers. A reward of $50,000, which was later upped to $100,000, was offered for the identification, leading to the arrest of the murderer. Reporters from all over the country flocked to LA to cover this case, calling it the most horrible crime of the decade. Bear in mind, this was only 2 years after the Leopold and Loeb case. People were so frightened that a lot of them kept their children out of school, and it was reported that Californians forgot Christmas because they were so terrorized by this case. Mexico closed its borders with the U.S. so that the fox wouldn't escape into their country. People were so outraged that innocent people got caught up in this. One man was arrested 7 times in one day because he matched the description of the kidnapper. Another man was beaten by an angry mob. He was rescued by the police and taken into custody for his own protection, but he hanged himself in his cell. But on December 20th, the police got a breakthrough. The killer's getaway car, which had been recently stolen from San Diego, was discovered abandoned. They took fingerprints. Now, this was before APHIS, so they had to manually match them, and this could be a really long and tedious process. But in this case, it actually didn't take very long to match the prints to those of a 19-year-old con named William Edward Hickman, Jr. Hickman had indeed been an employee of Parker's until he got caught with about $400 worth of stolen and forged checks. So for that crime, he had been sentenced to probation, and after that, he had went back to his hometown of Kansas City, Missouri, stayed there for a while, and then returned to LA. Specifically, he returned to the Bellevue Arms Apartments and signed in under an assumed name, Donald Evans. So police rushed back to Evans' apartment. On closer inspection, they found bloody footprints, partially burnt letters that looked like first drafts of the ransom notes, and newspaper clippings of the crime. In addition, a janitor who worked there said that on the 16th, he saw Evans carrying several bundles out to his car, and then later he was cleaning the seats of his car. Soon, a report came in about another stolen car, a green Ford Hudson. The carjacker matched the description of Hickman. Based on these various sightings, police could tell that Hickman was heading north. Sure enough, a gas station attendant in Portland, Oregon, reported seeing Hickman and his green Ford Hudson. He said that he was headed east once he left the gas station. Next, one of the $20 gold certificates turned up in Arlington, Oregon, which was a town east of Portland. So on December 22nd, the Pendleton police chief, Tom Gurdane, and an Oregon Highway patrolman named Cecil Llewellyn set out to find Hickman. Based on where he had been sighted and his direction of travel, they knew that he would have to be on only one of a few roads. So they staked those roads out. And sure enough, on Old Oregon Trail Road outside the town of Echo, they saw a green Hudson pass them by. They said the driver looked squirrely. The officers gave chase, and after only about 2 miles, Hickman pulled over. He had 2 hitchhikers in his car who turned out just to be innocent hitchhikers, but he also still had $1,400 of the ransom money. News of his arrest traveled quickly, and reporters quickly descended on the small county jail where he was being held. Hickman didn't seem nervous at all. In fact, he seemed to be sort of relishing in his newfound fame. He even asked the reporters if they thought he might become as well known as Leopold and Loeb. While he was still in the county jail talking to reporters, he confessed to the crime. At first, though, he claimed that he had only been an accomplice, that there were two brothers who actually murdered Marion. But police quickly realized that that was a lie. The two brothers that Hickman pointed the finger at had been incarcerated for months. So he was extradited to LA. While he was in jail there, he confessed to yet another murder that he had committed during an armed robbery of a drugstore a few years earlier. It had been part of a string of robberies that he and an accomplice had committed. Now, with two people killed, he actually fits today's FBI definition of a serial killer. Over the course of the next few days, police were able to coax Hickman into a full confession. He said that when he first took Marion, he had no intention of killing her. He said, "Marion and I were good friends, and we had a good time while we were together." He also said, "I really liked her." He said the decision to kill her had come upon him suddenly for no reason. He said that while she was blindfolded and tied to a chair, he came up behind her with a towel and strangled her. Once he thought she was dead, he undressed her except for her underwear. He was very, very clear about that. He may be a serial killer, but he's not a pedophile. He then took her body to the bathtub, cut a hole in her jugular, hung her upside down, and let her bleed out. Once that was done, he dismembered her and disemboweled her. He explained to the police that while he was doing that, her body jerked so violently it nearly came up out of the tub, which almost makes it seem like Marion might have still been alive while he was doing this to her. After wrapping her limbs and organs in newspaper, he stuffed her head and torso into a suitcase, loaded it all up in his car, and went to go see a movie. But he said he couldn't really concentrate on it, so he went back to his apartment. Then he realized that her father might actually want to see her before he handed over the money. So he used makeup on her face and used a wire to hold her eyelids open. He then put her head on top of her torso and wrapped it all up really tightly in blankets to hold everything all together. At his arraignment, Hickman pled not guilty by reason of insanity. He was the first inmate in California to do so. His trial began January 25th, 1928. Huge crowds thronged the steps of the courthouse. It was described like a lynch mob. In fact, a riot nearly broke out when it was revealed that the judge had given some of the reserved seats to his cronies and friends of his wife. It drew reporters from all over the country, including Edgar Rice Burroughs, and it made front page headlines all over the nation. Millions of Americans followed the trial really closely, including one recent immigrant named Ayn Rand. She had been working in Hollywood at the time, and like most people, was fascinated by the case, and she wrote about it in her journal several times. Unlike the, quote, small-minded masses, she did not see Hickman as a monster. In fact, she saw him as a sort of Nietzschean Superman. Quote, "A man with no regard whatever for all that society holds sacred, with a consciousness all his own." She read this quote from him in a newspaper: "I am like the state. What is good for me is right." So she wrote in her journals that this statement was, quote, "the best and strongest expression of a real man's psychology I have ever heard." Her only criticisms were for the press and the public, because they, quote, mediocre as they were, rushed to judgment. "The first thing that impresses me about the case," Rand wrote, "is the ferocious rage of the whole society against one man. It is not the crime alone that has raised the fury of public hatred. It is the case of a daring to challenge society." In her journals, she criticized the press for attempting to, quote, degrade Hickman in their coverage. It was as though it infuriated them to see strength, pride, and courage in this criminal, and to see that they could not break him, she wrote. It seemed to be the mob's subconscious fury at the sight of such virtues in its enemy. To be fair, Rand's devotees will point out that she didn't approve of him murdering anyone. In fact, she lamented that he, such a brilliant, unusual, exceptional boy, had gone down such a purposeless path. Yet her otherwise worshipful praise of him kind of makes her disapproval look more like a pro forma statement than an actual moral stance. Hickman would serve as the inspiration for Danny Renahan, the main character in Rand's unfinished novella named The Little Street. Renahan would be, she wrote, a Hickman with a purpose, and without the degeneracy. It is more exact to say that the model is not Hickman, but what Hickman suggested to me. The same narcissistic, sociopathic traits that Hickman had were also central to the main characters in Rand's other more popular works like Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead. Her protagonist, she wrote, had the spirit of Argon and the nature of a medieval feudal lord, imperious, impatient, uncompromising, untamable, intolerant, unadaptable, passionate, intensely proud, superior to the mob, an extreme extremist, no respect for anything or anyone. But regardless of his supposed superiority, it only took the jury about 45 minutes to find him guilty and sentence him to death. The verdict was met with cheers. While he was on death row, Hickman converted to Catholicism and wrote letters of apology to his victims, which must have been disappointing to Rand. On October 19, 1928, surrounded by a standing room only crowd, Hickman was hanged at the San Quentin gallows. But when the trapdoor opened, he slipped and fell, so he didn't drop precisely and it didn't break his neck. So instead, he slowly strangled to death, the same way he had killed Marion Parker. So what do you think about the William Hickman case, or the way that he inspired Ayn Rand? Let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Think about subscribing and maybe supporting me on Patreon. The link is in the description. Until next time, Darklings.